Good evening, campers, dreamers, and babysitters. I'm Luke Janesco, and today's the day. We made it to every horror fan's favorite holiday. I figured what better way to celebrate than to look at some of the most horrifying phobias induced by film. I've certainly got a grab bag of gore for you, so let's get into this list because I'm feeling real claustrophobic in this mask. Oh shit. I can't get this off. Help!
Kicking off the list of phobias in the number 5 spot is Formidophobia, the fear of scarecrows, with the 1988 cult classic, yes, you guessed it, Scarecrows. Bank robbers parachute from a hijacked plane into a field full of killer scarecrows. One of the most obscure phobias I had as a kid was Formidophobia, and it hit early on just because of this random watch on television. After watching this one, pumpkin patches were a horrifying outing for me during the Halloween season for the next few years, and to be honest, I don't think I ever fully recovered from my PTSD of watching the scarecrow being ripped apart in The Wizard of Oz.
They tore my legs off and they threw them over there. Then they took my chest out and they threw it over there.
Scarecrows is a bit slow to get started, especially when you're looking for a good horror story, but oddly, it's how it was able to successfully terrify me as a kid. The basic story follows these mercenaries who have just pulled a heist, but one mercenary, Bert, decides to make a getaway with the loot. As the rest of the team pursue after Bert, it plays off as somewhat of an action movie feel for a lot of this film. I remember flipping through the channels as a kid and just turning this one on thinking I was in for some sort of Chuck Norris, Delta Force kind of film, and then these supernatural scarecrows start walking around as the body count starts to grow. The film really lets you get lost in the hunt between the mercenary teams, so the way they portray the scarecrows and what happens to Bert later on really freaked me out for a long time. Watching this film then shortly after discovering Dark Night of the Scarecrow, which isn't as heavy on the scarecrow imagery, but that sequence of Bubba being shot while hiding in the scarecrow outfit just piled onto my phobia as a kid. I always forget how strong the imagery surrounding scarecrow horror can be. It never really feels like we get enough in the subgenre. Every once in a while, I see something that reminds me how lucrative the tension can be. The opening sequence of Jeepers Creepers 2 has such a perfect build as the creeper mimics a scarecrow before making his way off with his next victim. Leaning on that imagery of just this dark silhouette in this massive cornfield was absolutely terrifying. Even looking at something a little more modern like Harold in Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, which is one of my favorite tales from that book series, and then seeing it come to life in the 2019 film was both gratifying but terrifying to see a story that was part of my childhood on the screen. Scarecrows is able to venture into some dark places with its story while maintaining that campiness that makes a lot of 80s films so great. The scene when Bird is getting beaten up by the team he betrayed, but he maintains this emotionless feel the whole time. Then his shirt is ripped open to reveal he's been stuffed with straw, and then we see the stolen money actually inside his chest. Having his head cut off, then the team eventually dissecting him was such a haunting scene when I was a kid. Now looking back on it, I have such a love for how weird and 80s the film feels. While the film had a limited budget and a troubled production because of the lack of funds, I love that it tries to make the most of its concept. When the scarecrows start picking off each mercenary, it becomes everything I wanted in a film like this. Jack's death gets gruesome as they saw off one of his hands and stab him in the face, making sure to leave some memorable gore toward the end of the film. Scarecrow horror feels like such an underrated piece of the horror space. We certainly need more of it after reminiscing about so many different great scenes that involve scarecrow imagery. So check this one out if you haven't already, and if you know any other good scarecrow recommendations I didn't mention here, please throw them my way. From walking scarecrows to killer toys, bringing all that childhood fear is Stuart Gordon's Dolls in number 4. A dysfunctional family of 3 stop by a mansion during a storm. The child discovers that the elderly owners are magical toy makers and have a haunted collection of dolls. The movie poster for this one still gives me chills. Ugh. While I do have to give Charles Lee Ray and the Good Guy Doll their flowers for scaring the shit out of me, Stuart Gordon's Doll certainly amplified my my fear of dolls. Good lord, one mispronunciation and YouTube is gonna come for us. Without question, I always look at Chucky and Child's Play as the definitive killer doll film. It created my phobia of dolls coming to life, tying me to the bed and spanking me with the ruler.
You've been very naughty, Miss Kettlewell.
Well, maybe that last part is a bit of a kink. Anywho, as a kid, I watched Child's Play 2 and had enough PTSD that I stayed away from that franchise for a bit. But Dolls was a movie I stumbled upon in the mid-90s on television, and it freaked me out just as much. Another very important piece to this puzzle was that for some reason I decided I wanted to be a ventriloquist when I saw the Howdy Doody dummy in one of those JCPenney Christmas catalogs. Getting that little ginger with the cowboy boots that year for Christmas, I was pretty excited to start this new venture of mine. But then watching Dolls made sure that this Christmas gift would be my biggest regret for the next few years. I had compartmentalized my fear of Chucky, thinking that he was a good guy doll, so I really didn't have to worry about that. But watching all these random dolls come to life and wreaking havoc made me quite suspicious of my Howdy Doody doll and, of course, my sister's American Girl dolls. Watching this random group of people stuck in this dark mansion during a storm really set that classic dark and stormy night atmosphere you love for any horror story. While some of these scenes come off as campy as you get older, being a kid and watching some of these sequences unfold would keep me up at night. One of the most memorable scenes I remember staying awake at night thinking about is when Ralph and Judy go up to the attic searching for Isabel, who was attacked a little earlier on in the film. As they make their way up to the attic after following a blood trail, they search the attic but don't find Isabel, neglecting to notice that she's tied to a chair in the shadows of the attic. Isabel clearly can't speak as she tries to get their attention, and her face looks more like a doll than a human at this point. The eeriness that scene has, just seeing some of Isabel in the darkness, then having the lightning strike to show her stuck in this chair, unable to scream, was nightmare fuel for me as a kid. The cherry on top is when her friend Enid goes up to the attic to find her, and we see Isabel is turning into a doll when her eyes fall out of her head. When the dolls start to attack Enid and she breaks them open to unveil this human-like inside was another added element of disgust, which makes Dolls feel so different from some other haunted doll films. Then watching Ralph in the sea of angry dolls made me lose my shit as a kid. The moment when they all turn their attention to him as they get angry and then they start to dogpile on top of him freaked me out to no end. There's a lot of great gore and this fairy tale feel to the story that makes Dolls a unique installment in the subgenre. Getting steeped in its campiness makes you forget that there's some really fun horror throughout this film, and as a kid this one would keep me awake at night waiting for my final face-off with that damn Howdy Doody doll. I wouldn't want to be locked in a coffin with Chucky, but if it's Ryan Reynolds, maybe the claustrophobia wouldn't hit as hard in the number 3 pick, Buried. Paul is a U.S. truck driver working in Iraq. After an attack by a group of Iraqis, he wakes to find he is buried alive inside a coffin. If you already have claustrophobia, well, Buried is going to give you an instant panic attack as soon as you flip this one on.
I'm in a glass case of emotion!
You're hit with this intense amount of dread as soon as Ryan Reynolds flips that lighter and we see what exactly is going on. The sound design is an element that really helps sell this concept. The creaking of the coffin as Paul is just enclosed in the space and pushes on the lid, only to hear some of the sand fall through the crack, makes you feel like you're trapped along with Ryan Reynolds. This is a pretty basic premise of a truck driver, Paul, who's taken captive for ransom in the Middle East. While it doesn't lean on any twists or turns for the most part, the basic story of just being held for ransom feels so real in that situation. And then, of course, piling on Reynolds' acting ability makes this such a panic-inducing watch. The moment Paul gets a call from the cell phone that was left inside the coffin and his captor says, "You American, then you're a soldier."
You American?
Yeah.
Then you soldier.
We find out the entire dynamic of this situation as his captors want $5 million in order to let him out. That follow-up shot of Ryan Reynolds just laying there after he knows this information, he's surrounded in darkness and the only light is coming from that phone. It gives you that intense emotion for his character and the impossibility of escaping the situation. This commentary that also exists when it comes to a price of a life is another device that I didn't think about until I was watching this film, but it gives you so much more anguish in the situation. When his captors request $5 million for his release and Ryan Reynolds has to tell them, no one is going to pay $5 million for me, basically having to say that his life isn't worth enough to the right people for him to even get out of the situation. But then his captors quickly say they'll take $1 million. That drastic change in the sum of the request just really emphasizes that Paul is just this pawn in a game. The level of defeat this film is able to achieve using one singular location and some very compelling dialogue is just absolutely astounding. The moment when Paul calls his mother in the nursing home just adds another heartbreaking dynamic in this film. Paul's mother is clearly dealing with some memory issues and doesn't even remember him when he first calls her. Through some crafty dialogue, we even get kind of a temperature check of his relationship with his mother when he asks, "Did you even get the flowers I sent a few months ago?" alluding to the idea that he really doesn't call his mother that regularly. There's so many significant emotional beats in this film, showing this real human being going through a situation we would all be terrified of. As Paul's in this coffin, he receives a call from his company to let him know that he's been released from his contract due to an ongoing relationship with another worker, basically absolving the company of any sort of insurance payout upon his death because he is no longer an employee, which just adds another element of anguish in this film. Then adding in another element of psychological torture, that worker that they're alluding to is eventually killed on screen when his captors send him a video of Pam being murdered because he did not do what they asked. Ryan Reynolds puts on a great performance as Paul, who's just this regular dude who's a truck driver who finds himself in this situation that would be terrifying for any human being. And Reynolds actually said that this film made him suffer from claustrophobia, which I think you can feel on screen through his performance. He brings such a real portrayal of fear and the character's situation. Reynolds, being the only character that appears on screen other than those brief moments with Pam, puts a lot of weight on him as an actor, but he pulls it off beautifully. Coming from a comedic background, the two hardest things to do are to make people laugh and to make people feel scared, which is why I think a lot of comedic actors thrive in the horror space when they venture out into the genre. That feeling of claustrophobia exudes from the screen, and you really feel bad for Paul, but at the same time, you feel that anxiety that the character's going through. I was really skeptical about this one on my first watch, but it's crafted so well, and it shows audiences that even a pretty basic concept can still chill you to your core. Get out the Purell and bleach for the silver medal of phobias, because coming in at number 2, cabin fever. 5 college graduates rent a cabin in the woods and begin to fall victim to a horrifying flesh-eating virus. I could drink a gallon of bleach and still feel totally grossed out before my organs shut down if I had just watched Cabin Fever. I think this is my first real introduction into something I would call gross out horror back in 2002, and not really expecting that considering this was Eli Roth's directorial debut at the time. After seeing this, the Hostel franchise, and the Green Inferno, Roth has a gift for the sick and twisted, but being a germaphobe, this film makes you gag pretty consistently throughout. I remember acquiring this one from my local Hollywood Video at the time of its release and being really excited that Ryder Strong was in a horror movie. And first off, I had to recalibrate my brain to realize that Sean Hunter was not the cool guy in this film.
I said, but...
Which was a tough task, but when Roth starts spanking us with so much gore, I quickly came to terms with it. This film just hit at the absolute right time for me, or wrong time depending on how you really look at it. Already having an intense fear of germs as a kid, then seeing outbreaks like SARS, West Nile virus, and even the anthrax scares at the time, all within a few years of each other, amplified that paranoia that's presented in Cabin Fever. There are just so many disgusting scenes in this film. Every single sequence tends to linger with you, and it makes you develop these irrational fears. To be freaked out by bottled water really shows you how much terror this film brought. Being a bit of a personal story for Eli Roth, he experienced a skin infection on his face that caused him to constantly itch and even cut off some of the skin when he was shaving. He felt expanding on an idea like that could really churn an audience's stomach. He was able to create this beautiful melting pot of horror. Roth cited an American Werewolf in London and Evil Dead 2 when developing the film's tone of comedy and horror, as he wanted the audience to be laughing one moment, then terrified and grossed out the next. Cabin Fever really feels like a time capsule film, really being a snapshot of its time in 2002 and what we've seen and are going to see in the horror space. A group of 5 friends go out to a secluded cabin, having that camaraderie we've seen in so many iconic slashers over the last decades, gratuitous nudity, and comedy that wouldn't work in a 2025 lens. While also kicking off this gross-out horror wave we will see with another Roth property, Hostel, and other films like Saw and House of a Thousand Corpses. There's such a weird dynamic with this film because it has the mechanics of what gives you the warm and fuzzies about the 80s slashers with its setting and characters, but then turns those warm and fuzzies into the full-on bubble guts, making you want to shit your pants at the extreme Roth goes with the gore. Watching this rabbit hole of an outbreak happen after a very vanilla-looking Tyrone Biggums expels vomit, blood, semen. Yeah, there's probably some semen in that truck. Don't look at me like that, guys. There's semen on everything.
I was under the impression that everything was covered in a fine layer of semen.
Once we get that initial infection from Karen, we really start to see that influence from John Carpenter's The Thing as the paranoia grows of who could be next or who has already been infected. We see the characters react in unlikable but honestly logical ways, like separating Karen, making her stay out in the shed as she starts to get sicker. At this point, we are just waiting for a bomb to go off, and boy does it explode into a gory mess. Probably the most iconic scene is Marcy shaving the skin off her legs. Good lord, that one's brutal, but the one that really disturbs me to no end is after Marcy is ripped apart and Paul returns, he finds Dr. Mambo eating Karen's inside while she's still alive. That moment haunted me when I had first seen this film and is still one of the best all-time gross-out moments for me. This film always gave me so much paranoia when I was growing up and I would give it a watch, and it is already an unnerving watch, but post-pandemic it really does bring up that PTSD of constantly washing your hands, just overall disgust when thinking about germs. This one has a lot of funny moments mixed with some weird characters and a lot of disgusting gore, which makes this one a great rewatch. Ruining everyone's childhood and giving every adult some intense coulrophobia is the #1 pick. Of course, it's 1990's Stephen King's It. In 1960, 7 preteen outcasts fight an evil demon who poses as a child-killing clown. 30 years later, they reunite to stop the demon once and for all when it returns to their hometown. When we talk about generational terror, the 1990 miniseries of Stephen King's It sits at the top of the mountain for me personally. Thanks to Stephen King and Tim Curry, I don't know a version of myself that wasn't afraid of clowns in some capacity. My dad is a huge Stephen King fan. He would always have a King book regularly in his hands, so naturally as a kid I saw a handful of the film adaptations, most of which I thought were just fun horror stories, but this one was totally different. I have vivid memories of watching this film for the first time, well, partially watching this film because the opening sequences made me hide my face in my couch pillows. Right out of the gate, we get 2 instances of murders in Derry, both involving young kids, and being a kid myself, watching this unfold broke my little brain. Seeing this little girl out riding her bike, then getting a glimpse of Pennywise behind these sheets, looking jovial, but then instantly turns into this threat, still gives me chills, even if we don't actually see any violence on screen. Moments later, we see that iconic Georgie interaction that always stuck with me through my entire childhood. Storm drains became a source of anxiety for me after seeing that white face and red hair appear from seemingly nowhere as Pennywise lures Georgie in with playful conversation. The abruptness of that attack, as well as leaving that and the prior scene to linger in the theater of the mind, really caused that first 12 minutes to stick in the depths of my young brain into adulthood. There is something so haunting about the presentation of the 1990 version of Stephen King's It. Even today, I oddly turn it on to feel some comforting aesthetic of the 90s, but then I'm instantly creeped out by one of my biggest fears growing up. Harnessing that intense coulrophobia, Pennywise became this iconic figure of fear for so many kids growing up in the late 80s and early 90s. Even throughout the last decades, we've seen the clown aesthetic used for so many other horror figures, even another incarnation of Pennywise, but none have been able to encapsulate what made Tim Curry's version so terrifying. Curry gives this performance of a lifetime with his version of Pennywise. Being too terrified as a kid, I can never really appreciate it until I got older. He has this look in his eyes, like a chained up dog frothing at the mouth to get to his next meal. There's also this annoyance in Pennywise's humor. You get that feeling that this entity is almost resentful of its shape, using a clown as a humorous disguise, but has grown tired and his humor has become more aggressive as he wants to get right down to scaring his prey. While I appreciate the Skarsgård version, I don't think it has the same presence as the 1990 version does. Appearing as your typical clown you'd see at a circus as opposed to the 2017 stylistic aesthetic. While Skarsgård's version is unnerving, there is something off from the very start. Curry's version feels like it will catch a child in a vulnerable state, letting their guard down and then rip your arm off and devour you. While I think everyone is in agreement that the portion with the adults doesn't hold up as well, it does have some scary sequences that make it memorable when Pennywise isn't a giant-ass spider. The scene when they all get back together to enjoy a succulent Chinese meal,
Get your hand off my penis!
and Pennywise crashes the party will live rent-free in my head every time I want to order some General Tso's chicken. The death of Stan and how Pennywise continuously mocks him to terrorize the Losers Club was so mean-spirited. Having his head appear in the fridge was so terrifying, which is what makes the clown horror subgenre so much fun. From its theater of the mind, visual terror from Pennywise, and an all-time performance from Tim Curry, this film was a perfect storm to terrorize an entire generation of young horror fans. There weren't many films that I saw as a kid that continuously stuck in my brain, but Stephen King's It from 1990 still gives me that unnerving feeling whenever I give it a watch. Well, this list has certainly stirred up my PTSD, so my Halloween is definitely going to be a fun one, but Howdy Doody is locked away. There's not a scarecrow in sight, and I'm steering clear of any storm drains for the next 24 hours. But there are so many other phobias I did not get a chance to tackle, so if you like this list, or if any of these phobias hit with you, please let me know down in the comments. And as always, if you're new here and like what you see, please consider subscribing, maybe even a like and a share if you think we've earned it. And for the diehards, the Splatter fam already out there, until next time, stay scared.
Do the horse shit, gonna do it live, 'cause Splattercast kick it every day they live. Splattercast, gonna smash your ass. Splattercast, gonna smash your ass. Splattercast, gonna smash your ass. Splattercast, gonna smash your ass.